Welcome everyone to this bonus series of the Discovery Church podcast. We are doing a series at church at the moment called I Am, looking at the names of God. I've got Matt Destry and Zeke Murley here with me on the podcast today.
Hey guys.
Howdy.
So this is a bonus series to go along with our Sunday messages. We launched the series on Sunday. Interestingly, we're doing a 6-week series. So over the next 6 weeks, we're going to be diving into 6 of the names of God that appear in Scripture. And our hope is that as we do this, it's a chance for all of us to get to know God better as we look at the names he uses to describe himself and the way he chooses to reveal his heart and his nature to his people. There are actually 16 names of God listed in Scripture, so we're only just going to be really scratching the surface, but I'm excited to dive in. So on Sunday just gone, you can loop back and catch that on our podcast if you haven't listened to that one yet. Matt opened the series for us and just laid some groundwork about the names of God, and then we dived into the first one of those that we're focusing on, which was Jehovah Jireh.
Yeah.
So Maddie, do you want to give us like the 60-second recap for those that might not have listened, or just to re-jog our memories on where you positioned us?
Yeah, for sure. So 2 things. So the first thing is make sure if you want to get a primer on the names of God and why we have different names that come to us through the Hebrew Scriptures, the first 5-10 minutes of Sunday Just Gone's message will be helpful for you with that. Then we moved into a study on Genesis 22, and we looked at the, I guess, somewhat iconic story of Abraham and Isaac, which is a really beautifully well-told story in its own right. The story of God asking Abraham to sacrifice his son Isaac as a burnt offering upon the Mount of Moriah. And we're told through the story that Abraham doesn't offer up any resistance, really, but they make their way to that place, and Isaac on the way asks, well, we've got the wood and we've got the fire and we've got everything we need for the sacrifice, but where's the lamb? And Abraham says, well, the Lord will provide the lamb. And of course they get up there and he's about to sacrifice his son. And then the angel of the Lord intervenes and says, no, Abraham, don't do it. Turns around. There's a ram caught in a thicket behind him. And so someone said this week after that message, that was an unlucky day for that ram, like bad day to get caught in a thicket. And that ram becomes a sacrifice instead. And the big story is, or the big message is, God saying to Abraham, now I know, this was a faith of you. Now I know that who I am is, and who I am to you, and the obedience to my voice is more important to you than the promise of progeny, the promise of these unfolding generations that are going to come out from you. It's more important that you obey me, Abraham, than you get what you want, which is a family. We talked about on the weekend just the challenges that we have with distance chronologically, because child sacrifice is something we should and are rightly kind of shocked at and right now, and it doesn't feel like it really fits with our culture. So we had to do a bit of work just understanding that. But getting to that point on the Mount of Moriah where the Lord is now known and reveals himself as Jehovah Jireh, Yahweh Jireh, the Lord who provides. And how that stands in contrast with every other god in the ancient Near East, which was a God who would take, a God who demands sacrifice and who even demands child sacrifices. God uses this story and this setup to show himself as a different kind of God. I'm not like that. I'm a God who gives, not a God who takes. I'm a God who provides, not a God who requires. And that's where the big difference in the story that comes in. So,
and that's kind of one of the big parts of why we're doing this series, is because all through Scripture, God uses different names to express himself and to reveal himself to his people. And all through Scripture, we see the people of God worshipping, like the worship of other gods and other idols was rampant through the culture. And so what I'd love us to talk about today is, because sometimes we read scripture and we think, well, we don't worship Baal, we don't worship Ashtaroth.
Yeah.
But our culture actually is full of false idols and false gods. They just have different names and they look like different things today. And so I'd love to hear from you guys, particularly as we think about Jehovah Jireh and the way that God expressed himself as, I am the Lord who provides. What do you see in our culture that would be the idols or the false gods that stand in opposition to that stop us as followers of Jesus from truly experiencing God or engaging with him or receiving him as provider?
Yeah, well, you say that we don't have gods such as Baal and Ashtaroth and all these sort of
Molech
ones. These other ones, right? But I would say, from a cultural perspective, I think one of maybe the biggest idols or gods, that maybe we don't see it as that, but I would say the idol of self is probably one of the biggest ones in contradiction to that. Self-reliance, self-made, there's this whole idea of being a self-made person, I grinded my way to get to where I am. And there is this element in our culture where it's actually celebrated that you got to your place because of you, which in some ways is not necessarily a bad thing, but when you're looking and reflecting on God's character as a provider, as Jehovah Jireh, you go, sometimes we can over-rely on self and under-rely on God. And I think that's probably one of the biggest ones. Another one that came to my mind is materialism.
Yeah, for sure.
Don't know, you want to speak into that one a little bit more, but...
Yeah, well, I was thinking about gratitude and thinking about whenever I feel entitled, it's because I feel like I've earned something. And I'm reminded of that verse in the New Testament where the Apostle Paul says, what do you have that you have not received? And the answer is, well, it's a rhetorical question, but the answer is nothing. I've received everything. Everything I have, I've received. And even if I've worked for something, I didn't start from scratch. I started with what I had. And I think coming back to that place, if everything's a gift, if God has provided life and breath and everything, then that's surely the pride that says, well, I've done. This is me. That's the pride that says that, and I've provided for myself. I've done all of these things. Stands in opposition to that. Yeah.
It's like grind culture as well.
Yeah.
Like that's a big buzzword, and especially from a younger community. There's a whole bunch of social media influencers who their platform is based on grind. I'm where I am because I grinded and I, I've put in so I get, that sort of idea, which when you align that with a Christian ideals and a Christian worldview, it doesn't really align, because everything that we have is being given as a gift from God. And there's a understanding that there's something greater than us that actually even gives us the ability to be able to sit in this room and talk with one another and exchange ideas and chat about life and be thankful and have gratitude and all this sort of stuff. So it's a huge part of it.
Yeah, grind culture is crazy. I get up at 3 a.m. I do my cold bath at 4 a.m.
Yeah.
I do my meditation at 5 a.m.
Yeah.
I eat steak at 6 a.m. And then I start my work for the day. And then I'm an entrepreneur in 9 businesses.
Yeah.
But if you think about it, if you draw your worth and your value, if the message you have in your heart is, my contribution to society and my worth as a human in the world is solely based on what I can produce, then you will never be able to receive the fullness of Jehovah Jireh to you. Because if your identity is attached to what you can produce and your worth is attached to what you can contribute, it will forever stop you from receiving the wonder of what it is to trust God in a way that says, no matter what, I trust you as the one who is the ultimate provider
Yeah. More than that, you become a product. So you become an item to be bought and sold. When you base your entire worth on your value of production. So the big principle is you become like what you worship. Right? So if you worship that, you become like that. You know, they worshipped idols and they themselves became a lie. And so this idea that if you worship that productivity, you become a product. You become part of the consumer system. Whereas if we can step out of that as people who follow Jesus and go, my value is not connected to what I produce. You can step out of that cycle and come at it with a bit more, come at it with more gratitude, come at it with a deeper sense of worth based on identity, based on what Jesus has actually done, on the provision that God has made for us, rather than on how useful we are to Him.
So you talked a bit about the difference between a test and a temptation on the weekend.
Yeah.
Just prompted me when you were saying that just now. So in this story, there's an invitation to trust God and an invitation to a greater obedience for Abraham. For you two, just in your own lives, the push and the pull between when something's a test and when something's a temptation. So this is a test or an invitation to trust God. What's the opposing temptation? I can either trust God in this situation to provide for me, or I'm...
Well, that's a really good question.
Yeah.
That sort of caught me off guard, that one. But no, I think one of the easiest things to do when you come up against the test, and maybe you're going through a season where you're not hearing God, or maybe God's not showing Himself, and maybe it is leaning to what you shared about on the weekend. But there is an either act of, I'm going to be obedient, even though I don't see, even though I don't know the fullness of what is coming. I'm either have a choice to be obedient or to not. And so either it's I go this way, even though I don't necessarily know. I've actually been thinking about this, and yesterday I was chatting with you about it, Jodes, but I've been really thinking about buildings and trees, and one's built and one's planted. When you plant a seed, you don't know what that tree is going to look like. You may know the type, you may know the fruit that's going to come from it, but you don't know exactly what it's going to look like. And when you start building a building, you know exactly what it's going to look like. Anyone who starts trying to build a building without the full plans is actually, it would be seen as silly to do that. Yeah. And I see that the same is when God calls you, often it is in a seed form that you don't know exactly what the end result is going to look like, how long it's going to take, how long it's going to take to get there.
Yeah, how it's all going to outwork.
But that requires a level of obedience in planting, in watering, in nurturing, and making sure the soil is fruitful and ready to take it on. Whereas building is that idea of I need to know everything before I start going. And that is the internal battle that I think we find when it comes to a test is we don't know the full thing. And a temptation that we can require is I'm not going to act in obedience until I know the full plan.
Wow,
and
good.
I think God is calling us into a different way of living, a different way of understanding His words, and a different way of coming into, as you say, that revelation of God is you don't need to know before you will go before you know.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what Abraham
you have to go.
modeled in the story, didn't he?
Yeah.
You know, having to would he trust God in this situation when the outcome was unknown?
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
So what about in your own life? Tell me a story, Maddie, about how you have learned or are continuing to learn to lean into that part of God's nature as the ultimate provider, and how you, is there a time in your life or your journey where you can remember getting to that point of having to just relinquish the need to control the outcome? Or
yeah, it's a good question. My mind goes from macro to micro, really big life decisions that we've made. it could be something huge like, like the decision to, like have children or get married or move house, or like, really big kind of like what feel like at the time for us monumental life decisions. Because you never know how any of those things, or go into a new job, like outcomes, you never know how those outcomes are going to come about, especially, but if you feel like the Lord's asked you to go into them, is that what you mean, or do you mean
I was just thinking, when before we moved to Discovery, and when the Lord was speaking to us about that, and we sensed him calling us here, there was so many things that were unknown about that for us.
Oh yeah, heaps.
So many question marks, so many blanks that we were like, how is this all going to come together and work out? Moving away from the place we'd grown up, moving away from all of our family support. But we felt so confident that the Lord had called us. And one of the things the Lord spoke to us about as we were praying and discerning and saying yes to Jesus was, he said to us, he promised us a smooth landing.
Yeah, soft landing.
A soft landing. And we held on to that. And I remember as we were settling in, we were giving thanks for that, because everywhere along the way, the right spots at the right school became available. We were able to form family and connections down here, and some people who really gathered around us in the community. And there were all of these markers of the Lord revealing himself as provider.
Right.
But we had to...
Well, this is a great story.
Yeah, I should have told you to share this one earlier.
No, I should have asked you. Hey, Jodes, tell us about the time when we moved.
No, but that's a good example of going, we know you're calling us, Lord. I can sense you leading us.
Great.
We don't know how this is going to turn out. And him really leaning in and revealing himself and saying, you know what? If you trust me with this, I will provide the way forward for you, and all the pieces will come together. I don't know if you've got a story, Zeke, like what comes to mind for you that might encourage people listening today who are struggling to really trust that the Lord will provide for them, or lean into that part of God's character.
And maybe it's a slightly different position I found myself in before Discovery, but when it started entering the process into coming a part of team here, I was in a position where actually I was really comfortable and things are really going good, and things are in a place where I was like, this is a great workplace. I love working here. I love my team. I love the boss that I'm working for. And at the same time, there's this happening in the background coming on team here as young adults and the neighborhood engagement pastor. And it sounds good, but I'm sitting in a position where I'm like, I love what I'm doing right now. Yeah. But
why would I change it when it's going so well? Yeah.
Like, I'm in a good position. I'm comfortable. Like, we're settled. Like, my family is going well. Like, we're in a good place. And then it's like God saying, you need to do this. You need to continue. And it was almost like God was slowly revealing himself to me in the way, you just need to have another conversation. You just need to have another conversation. You just need to have another conversation. And as we started discussing and chatting and going through the whole process, it became so clear that God was calling me here. But still there was that element of I had to let go of what I was what I loved, what I was comfortable, what was something that was actually bringing me a lot of joy and fruitfulness. And it was almost, I can look back now and go, even though fruitfulness was happening in that space, sometimes the best time to step out and be obedient when fruit is coming, because like I'm looking now and God is continually blessing our family. Like I was chatting with my wife, Steph, and I think she'll be okay with me sharing this, but this community, too late now. But we've just reflected on that this place here, it's when we walk into this house, this church, this community, it's just a place of peace for us. And that's something that I think God was wanting to redeem in me and Steph and our son Mac, especially from a church perspective. And so like that act of obedience, even when things were going really good, I think we can talk about being obedient when things are challenging and things are not how I thought, but when it's good, it's
almost even harder.
It is harder.
Sometimes,
it's really hard. So that was probably my story that come to mind when I'm thinking of that. Yeah.
All right, we've got a couple of minutes left before we're going to bring this conversation to a close, but we're going to be doing these every week over the next 6 weeks.
Awesome.
After each of the messages. So that's coming up. But just wanted to loop back around to what we were talking about before about the cultural pulls and the everyday idols in our own world. What would you say? Because, you know, we seem to be a people who are frequently distracted and tempted to serve other things, other masters. There's a lot of things that are vying for our attention all the time, and those cultural pulls are very sneaky but very real, and sometimes you don't even realize that something's you know, has maybe even taken the place like that you are devoting more time and more attention and more affection to it than perhaps you should be. What are some ways that we can become more aware of those things and guard our hearts against those everyday idols that set themselves up in our culture that want to pull us away from our devotion to Jesus and from really experiencing the fullness of who he is?
I think, I think inbuilt into what you're saying is this understanding, Jodes, that we are created for worship. We're created to worship something. And if we don't worship God, we are going to find ourselves worshipping self, money, possessions, whatever. So I think there's a defensive side, which is here's all the different things that are around me that I could be tempted to want to worship. I think I would like to take the offensive strategy, which is just placing Jesus so firmly at the center of your life. Like smack bang right in the middle. You don't have enough time to worship anything else. Like your hands are full. I'm Nehemiah. I'm on the wall. I'm doing a great work. I'm not getting down. Like I know what I'm doing. Jesus is right here. He consumes my thoughts. He consumes my actions. He's what I live for. He's the reason why I spend my money. He's the reason why I wear what clothes I wear. He's the reason why he is right in the center of every single decision that I'm making. And if he's right there in the center of all of that, you ain't got to worry about worshiping anything else.
Yeah, God's been speaking to me about priority and that being the thing. What comes first is ultimately what you worship. And I was listening to a message by a pastor in America, and he speaks about Christians regaining this monastic lifestyle, one focus, and that's what you were speaking about, like God being Jesus being the center of it. And I think of a passage in Matthew 6, seek first his kingdom over all things. And so I'm really challenged by, because sometimes we can try and make it about, other things or how much time you spend in the word or all that sort of things. But it's really when things go wrong and things fall apart, and even when blessing starts to come, it is, what is the priority? What comes first? Because it's in those moments, because it's easy to just read scripture. It's easy to just do spiritual practices and just follow them in a routine manner. But it means when things go wrong, and everything falls out of your hands and you go, oh my goodness, what's going on? Often, and maybe this is an overreach, but what you turn to first tends to be what the idol is in your life. And so when everything falls apart in your family and you go, oh my goodness, what's going on in my bank account? Probably money is your idol. Or when something happens and there's dramas going on in family or different situations, because what are you turning to there? Is it God? Or are you turning to even sometimes the things that we turn to are good things, but it doesn't mean that these things aren't good things. It's just where the priority is matters. I think priority matters in this space.
That loud bump was Jesus knocking over the idol of my phone onto the
Awesome. Well, Maddie, why don't you give us a quick teaser for the message that's coming up this weekend so
Right
people
on.
can
So-
get excited about what to expect?
Okay, so we're moving into Exodus.
Yep.
The people coming out of the Red Sea to making their way into the desert. They're getting to know God as provider. He's providing water for them. He's providing food for them, and they're going to also see what happens when they get attacked by an enemy force, and the way that God shows up for them in that kind of space. So we'll be exploring God, the God's name that gets revealed in that moment.
Awesome. Well, thanks, boys, for being on the podcast today. Hopefully this has been helpful for you. For those of you who are listening, we'd love you to jump on and listen to track along the series with us, and we'll be back next week to unpack the next installment of the Names of God series.
Thanks so much, everyone. See ya.
See ya.